The morning was cold, and the city moved in its usual rush. People hurried to their offices, some with coffee cups in hand, others speaking quickly into their phones. Cars honked in the distance, and the sidewalks were crowded with faces that never stopped long enough to notice one another. Among them sat a man who seemed invisible to most. His clothes were old, patched in several places, and his shoes looked like they had walked through countless miles without rest. His hair was messy, his beard rough, and his eyes carried the weight of sleepless nights. He sat quietly near the corner of a busy street, beside a piano that looked almost as forgotten as he was. The piano's paint was chipped, its keys yellowed with age, and a few strings were clearly out of tune. But to him, it wasn't just an instrument, it was a doorway back to the life he once knew. Propped up against the piano was a small piece of cardboard with shaky handwriting that read, "Can I play it for food?" Most people who passed by didn't even glance at the sign. They assumed he was just another homeless man trying to earn a few coins. Some people dropped spare change in the small metal cup at his feet, others walked by quickly, almost afraid to make eye contact. A few chuckled at the idea that this man could play anything on the piano. To them, it was a joke. The man looked too tired, too broken, to create anything close to music. But the man did not let their laughter bother him. He had lived through harder moments. He had been through storms in life that most people could not imagine. Once, he had stood tall and proud, wearing a uniform as he served his country. He had carried responsibilities that weighed heavier than the worn-out coat now draped across his shoulders. He had known the sound of applause, the shine of bright stage lights, and the respect of audiences who once recognized his talent. Now, all of that seemed like a distant dream. The war had left scars, not just on his body but deep in his mind. When he returned home, the world was different, and so was he. Work was hard to find, relationships grew distant, and the comfort of a home slipped away piece by piece. The streets became his shelter, and the piano, by chance, became his companion. The piano had been left outside an old shop. It was too heavy to move, too worn out to sell. To most, it was nothing but junk. But when the veteran found it, he saw something else. He saw a chance to feel alive again, even if only for a little while each day. He dusted it off, checked the keys, and although many were cracked or stiff, he still felt joy in placing his fingers on them. That morning, as he sat on the cold sidewalk, he noticed a small group of teenagers standing across the street. They laughed, pointing at his sign, nudging each other with smirks. One of them pulled out a phone, already expecting to record something foolish. To them, the idea of a homeless man playing a piano was funny, almost ridiculous. But the man stayed calm. He had seen worse laughter before. He had learned that people often judged without knowing the truth. He looked at the piano, then at his own hands. They were rough from the streets, but steady. Slowly, he lifted them onto the keys. The sound of the city carried on around him: car horns, footsteps, bits of conversation. But as soon as his fingers touched the piano, he felt a quietness within himself. He didn't start playing immediately. For a moment, he just closed his eyes. Memories rushed back: concert halls filled with people, the feel of polished black keys under soft stage lights, the thrill of creating melodies that made hearts rise and fall. He remembered his mother's face when he played as a young boy, her eyes proud as she listened from the kitchen. He remembered the teachers who told him he was born with a gift. He remembered nights when his music filled the air like a story, one that words could never tell. Now, on this street corner, none of that mattered to the people passing by. To them, he was just a tired man with a broken sign. But he knew something they did not. Music had never left him. The gift was still there, hidden beneath the dirt, the wrinkles, and the silence of the streets. He pressed the first key. It gave a dull sound, slightly off tune, but his hands moved with patience. Then another key, and another. The sound blended, and slowly, a melody began to form. At first, no one paid much attention. People walked by, barely noticing the shift in the air. But the man didn't play for their attention. He played because it was the only thing that still made him feel like himself. He played because music had once been his language, and even if the world had stopped listening, he could not stop speaking it. The notes grew stronger, smoother, filling the space around him. They carried a kind of sadness, but also beauty. The teenagers who had been laughing grew quiet. One of them lowered the phone, confused by the sound that was nothing like what he expected. An older woman walking by slowed down, her head turning toward the music. A little child tugged at her father's coat, pointing at the man playing with such focus. Still, the veteran kept his eyes closed, letting the music guide him. Each note was a memory. Each chord was a piece of his life stitched into sound. For him, the piano was not just wood and strings. It was hope, it was dignity, it was the voice he thought he had lost. The street corner began to change. The rush of footsteps slowed, conversations paused, and the noise of the city seemed to fade into the background. For the first time in a long while, people looked at him not as a homeless man but as someone with something powerful to share. And though he had not yet revealed who he really was, though no one there knew the depth of his story or the years of training and passion behind those hands, the first spark of truth had begun to show. The man who once felt invisible was slowly becoming seen again through the very thing that had always defined him, his music. The sound of the piano floated gently across the busy street, mixing with the morning air. At first, the people nearby were surprised, unsure if what they were hearing was real. Some tilted their heads, some stopped walking, and others simply stood in silence. A few minutes ago, they had laughed at the man sitting in rags, thinking he was nothing more than a tired soul begging for spare change. Now, their laughter was caught in their throats, replaced by something they hadn't expected: respect. The man's fingers moved with a calm grace, as though they had been born to live on those keys. His hands looked old, rough, even a little dirty from days spent on the streets, yet the sound that came out of them was polished, smooth, and rich. He didn't need sheet music, nor did he need to think about what to play. His soul simply spoke through the piano. Each note told a story, and though the crowd did not know the words, they could feel the meaning. But not everyone felt that way in the beginning. A small group of young men, the same ones who had been laughing before, still whispered among themselves. They nudged each other as if waiting for him to make a mistake, expecting the music to fall apart. To them, it was hard to believe that a homeless man could play so beautifully. One of them shook his head and muttered, "It's just luck. He probably memorized one song." The man didn't open his eyes. He didn't answer them. He just kept playing, letting his music drown out the doubt. His body swayed slightly with the rhythm, his foot tapping softly on the sidewalk like it was the stage floor he once knew. His music was patient, unhurried, yet filled with a quiet power that kept drawing more people in. Slowly, the crowd grew larger. Office workers running late to meetings stopped for a few moments, unable to resist listening. A mother pushing a stroller paused, rocking her baby gently while the little one stared wide-eyed at the sound. Even a police officer walking by slowed down, his stern face softening as the melody reached him. The city corner, usually loud and ordinary, had turned into something magical. Still, in the middle of this growing audience, some people shook their heads, unwilling to believe their own ears. "How can a man like that know how to play?" one whispered. "He's just pretending," another said, though the truth was right in front of them. Their laughter from earlier echoed in the air like an uncomfortable memory, reminding everyone of how quickly people judge what they do not understand. But the man kept on, his eyes still closed, as if the world around him didn't matter. He remembered the times he had played in grand halls, under golden lights, with thousands watching him in silence. He remembered how people used to dress up for evenings of music, holding their breath as the first note began. Back then, he was celebrated, admired, respected. Now, the only audience he had was a crowd on a noisy street. And yet, to him, it didn't matter where he played. Music was music, and it lived in him no matter the stage. The song he chose was not just a random tune. It was one he had written many years ago, during his younger days when he had dreams bigger than himself. It carried both joy and sorrow, like a wave that rises and falls. As his fingers moved faster, the melody grew stronger. The crowd grew quieter, their doubts slipping away, replaced by awe. The teenagers who had been smirking now stood frozen, realizing that this wasn't just luck or a memorized piece. This was true skill, something that could not be faked. A woman in the crowd whispered, "I can't believe it, he plays like a master." Another man nodded, pulling out his phone to record, no longer mocking but capturing the moment so others could see. The small metal cup in front of the veteran began to fill with coins and dollar bills, but this time it wasn't out of pity. People weren't giving because they felt sorry for him. They were giving because they valued his gift. Still, the man didn't stop to notice. He was lost in the music, in the only place where he felt truly alive. His heart, heavy from years of pain, lifted with each note. The laughter he had endured only minutes earlier seemed far away now, washed away by the sound of the piano. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just a man on the street. He was a musician again. Then something happened that made the crowd even more curious. As he transitioned into another piece, his style shifted. The melody became more complex, the rhythm sharper, faster. His hands moved with lightning speed, weaving sounds together that seemed impossible on such an old piano. The crowd gasped. Some clapped along softly, others stared in disbelief. It was then that a middle-aged man at the back of the crowd frowned, his eyes narrowing. He leaned closer to listen, recognizing something in the way the notes were played. He whispered to himself, that sounds familiar. He had once attended a concert many years ago, and the style, the flow, the emotion, it reminded him of someone. But the thought seemed too strange to be true. Could this man really be the same musician he had seen decades earlier, dressed in a tuxedo on a grand stage? The crowd didn't know yet. To them, he was still just a homeless man surprising them with unexpected talent. But questions began to rise. Who was he? Where did he learn to play like that? Why was someone with such skill sitting on a sidewalk instead of in a concert hall? Meanwhile, the young men who had laughed earlier lowered their eyes, ashamed. The smirks had faded from their faces, replaced by quiet respect. Some of them shuffled awkwardly, feeling guilty for their earlier words. They hadn't expected the joke to turn into a lesson. For the veteran, though, none of that mattered. His purpose wasn't to prove anything to them. He wasn't trying to win applause, and he wasn't chasing recognition. He was simply letting the music speak, because music had always been the one thing that never abandoned him. Friends came and went, life changed, the world grew colder, but the piano remained his constant companion. As the last note of the piece faded into the air, the street was silent for a moment. It was the kind of silence that carried meaning, the kind that only follows something truly powerful. Then, slowly, the crowd began to clap. It wasn't just polite applause, it was heartfelt, sincere. Some people even cheered. The sound echoed between the tall buildings, a sharp contrast to the laughter that had filled the air earlier. The man opened his eyes at last. He gave a small nod, not smiling but acknowledging the kindness. His eyes, though tired, shone with a quiet dignity. For a moment, he wasn't invisible anymore. He wasn't a stranger on the street. He was seen. He was heard. And though the crowd still did not know his full story, though they had yet to learn the depth of who he was and what he had lost, one truth had already become clear: they had laughed at the wrong man. After the music ended, the crowd lingered on the sidewalk, unsure if they should move or stay. People whispered to each other, their voices filled with surprise and curiosity. Some shook their heads in disbelief, while others looked around, searching for clues about the man who had played like a true master. Even those who had laughed earlier were now quiet, unsure what to say. It was as if the music had opened a door they didn't know existed, showing them a truth that was hard to ignore. The veteran carefully rested his hands on his knees, feeling the warmth of the applause that came not just from coins in his cup, but from the silent recognition in people's faces. For a moment, he closed his eyes again, breathing in the energy of the city. It had been a long time since he felt this alive, this connected to the world, even if it was just for a short while. A woman in a bright red coat stepped closer, holding her purse tightly in her hands. She looked nervous but curious. "Excuse me," she said softly. I I couldn't help but notice you're playing. It was incredible. Have you performed before?" The veteran opened his eyes slowly, meeting hers with calm, quiet intensity. "Yes," he said simply, his voice low but steady. "Many years ago. But now, this is enough for me." The woman smiled faintly, though her eyes were still filled with wonder. She could tell there was more to this man than the clothes he wore or the sign he had written. There was a story behind the music, a lifetime of experience embedded in each note. "You have a gift," she said. "People should know about it. They should hear you in a concert hall, not just here on the street." He shook his head slightly, looking down at the worn keys of the piano. "Some things change, and some doors close forever. But music stays." His words were quiet, almost a whisper, but they carried weight. People in the crowd began to murmur among themselves. Some were curious, others skeptical. "Why is a man like that on the street?" one asked. "He should be famous. He should have everything." Another added, "Maybe he chose this, maybe he doesn't want attention." It was clear that the veteran's presence was making people think, making them question their assumptions. They realized how quickly they had judged him before hearing a single note. They had assumed he was weak or useless, not realizing the depth of his experience and talent. The piano had been the truth teller, revealing what words alone could not. Then a young man, the one who had been recording on his phone earlier, finally stepped forward. He looked embarrassed, but there was curiosity in his eyes. I I'm sorry for laughing before," he admitted. I didn't know you could play like that." The veteran nodded slightly, accepting the apology without comment. He didn't need their validation. He didn't play to prove himself. He played because music was his life, and it was the only way he could speak without words. But even so, the acknowledgement felt lighter than he had expected. A little boy tugged at his mother's coat, pointing to the piano. "Mom, can he play more?" the child asked, eyes wide with excitement. The mother smiled and nodded, whispering, "Let's see what he plays next." For the veteran, seeing the child's eyes brightened with curiosity reminded him of something long forgotten: the joy of sharing music without expectation, the way it could connect people across generations. Slowly, he lifted his hands back onto the keys, letting his fingers stretch and flex. The crowd leaned in slightly, eager but respectful, waiting for the next piece. He started playing softly at first, a gentle melody that felt like a conversation rather than a performance. The music was calm, yet full of emotion, each note carefully chosen. Some people closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them, feeling the story behind the melody without needing to understand every detail. The veteran didn't just play notes, he played memories, emotions, and years of experience all rolled into one. As he played, his mind wandered back to his younger days. He remembered the excitement of traveling from city to city, performing in theaters and concert halls, the faces of people who were moved to tears by his music. He remembered the pride of his family, the way his mother would tell her friends about her son, the way his father would quietly listen, nodding with approval. Those memories were bittersweet because they reminded him of what he had lost, but at the same time, they fueled the music, giving it depth and soul. A man in a suit dropped $1 into the cup in front of him, not out of pity, but out of respect. Another woman reached into her bag and added coins, her eyes misty as she listened. Even the teenagers, who had started this all with laughter, were now silent, their expressions changing from doubt to amazement. They had been wrong, and they knew it, but more than that, they were witnessing something rare and beautiful. The veteran's fingers moved across the piano keys with precision and grace. Each note seemed to tell a story of hope, loss, resilience, and strength. The music was no longer just sound, it was a language, one that spoke directly to the hearts of those who listened. People who had walked by without noticing before were now stopping, drawn in by something they couldn't explain. A man with gray hair, standing near the back of the crowd, whispered to a friend, This is remarkable. He plays like someone who has dedicated his whole life to music." The friend nodded, eyes wide. I think he might be more than just a street performer." Indeed, the veteran's talent was undeniable. But he didn't need recognition to continue. Music was his companion, his solace, and his way to live fully even in a world that had forgotten him. Every note he played was a reminder that life could still hold beauty, even in the hardest circumstances. As he continued, more people began to gather, forming a semicircle around him. Some recorded the music on their phones, others simply watched silently, allowing themselves to be carried by the melody. The city noise faded into the background, replaced by the flow of the piano. For a moment, the streets felt like a concert hall, the crowd his audience, and the piano his bridge back to a life he had once known. Even the children in the crowd seemed captivated. One little girl held tightly to her mother's hand, her eyes wide as if she were witnessing magic. Another child clapped softly, trying to join the rhythm. For the veteran, seeing their joy reminded him why he continued to play, even when the world seemed harsh and unkind. Music had the power to touch hearts, to connect people across differences, and to remind everyone that life was not just about struggles, it was also about beauty. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. The veteran's fingers danced across the keys, creating a series of melodies that told stories without words. Some songs were lively, almost playful, while others were slow and reflective. The crowd responded to each change, their expressions shifting with the music. It was a silent conversation, one that needed no language, only understanding and feeling. At one point, a man in the crowd stepped forward. He wore a suit, carried a notebook, and had an expression of curiosity mixed with recognition. He had seen the veteran before, though not on the streets. He had attended concerts years ago, remembering a pianist whose style and presence had stayed with him. Now, seeing the man in rags play with such mastery, he realized that this was the same person. He whispered to the woman beside him, I think he's the pianist from the National Concert Hall. The one everyone admired years ago." The realization spread slowly, quietly, among the people who had been watching. Some looked at him with new eyes, others whispered among themselves. The laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by wonder, respect, and a desire to know more. But the veteran remained focused on the piano, not noticing the change in perception. He didn't play for fame or recognition. He played because music was the one thing that had never left him, no matter how far life had taken him from the stages he once knew. As the day went on, the street corner that had once been just another busy part of the city became a place of attention, reflection, and awe. People stopped to listen, to give, and to witness something extraordinary. And through it all, the veteran continued to play, each note a reminder of the man he once was, the life he had lived, and the hope that, even in the hardest moments, beauty could still be found. As the afternoon sun began to lower, casting long shadows across the street, more and more people gathered around the veteran and his piano. Word had begun to spread through whispers, text messages, and social media clips shared by the young man from earlier. People were curious, some skeptical, but all were drawn by the music that seemed to flow effortlessly from his hands. The crowd grew larger, yet remained respectful, sensing that they were in the presence of someone extraordinary. The veteran noticed the change but remained calm. He continued to play, letting each note resonate in the air. He had learned long ago that the world could be loud, harsh, and unforgiving, and that attention could be fleeting. But music had always been constant. It had never judged him for his past or his present. It had never asked for anything in return. And now, it was speaking for him in a way words never could. People began to recognize the style, the subtle techniques, the way each chord was placed with perfect timing. Some older members of the crowd whispered to each other, "That style, it's familiar. I've heard it before, decades ago. Could it really be?" Their voices trailed off as they listened, afraid to voice the thought aloud, yet unable to ignore the memory tugging at them. A woman in her 40s, holding a small notebook and pen, stepped closer, watching the veteran's fingers glide across the keys. She seemed to be recording every movement, every nuance. "I've never seen anyone play like this on the streets," she whispered to a friend. "He must have trained for years. That sound, it's professional. It's not something you just stumble upon." The veteran's mind wandered as he played. He thought about the past, the life he had once led, the applause, the recognition, the tours, and the fame. Those days felt like a lifetime ago, almost unreal, yet the memories were vivid. He remembered the thrill of performing in grand concert halls, the smell of polished wood, the soft murmurs of the audience as they awaited the first note. He remembered the lights, the cameras, the excitement in the air, and the satisfaction of knowing he had shared something beautiful with the world. But life had not been kind in later years. Circumstances had forced him to leave that world behind. Fame and recognition had faded, replaced by struggle and survival. Yet, he had never stopped playing. Music had remained a constant companion, a thread connecting him to the life he had once cherished. And now, standing on a cold street corner with worn shoes and tattered clothes, he was reminded that music's power was not limited to concert halls. It lived wherever it was allowed to exist, even amidst hardship. The crowd was now buzzing with curiosity. Phones were out, cameras were recording, and some people even sat down on the pavement to watch quietly. A reporter from a local news station had arrived, her microphone in hand. She looked around, realizing that something significant was happening, and stepped forward carefully, wanting to respect the moment. "Excuse me," she said politely, her voice soft so as not to disturb the music. "Would you mind if I spoke to you after you finish playing? People are amazed by your talent." The veteran paused briefly, then nodded. He didn't usually seek attention, but he understood the curiosity. He finished the piece he had been playing with a final flourish, the last note lingering in the air like a question that demanded an answer. The crowd erupted into gentle applause, not loud or theatrical, but heartfelt and sincere. As the clapping settled, people began to speak among themselves, sharing theories, guesses, and admiration. "Who is he?" one man asked. "I've never seen anyone play like that in my life." Another woman added, "He's a genius. I feel like I'm watching history right here on the street." It was then that a man in a suit approached cautiously, holding a small card in his hand. His eyes were wide with disbelief, and his voice trembled slightly as he spoke. "Sir. I think I know you. You used to perform at the National Concert Hall, didn't you? Years ago." The veteran looked at him, studying the man's expression. Recognition flickered in his eyes, though he remained calm. "Yes," he said quietly. "That was a long time ago." The man's face lit up with amazement. "I thought so. I remember your performances, they were legendary. People still talk about them." But, why are you here, on the street? Why are you playing for food? The veteran smiled faintly, not with pride, but with understanding. Life changes. Doors close. People forget. But music remembers. His words were simple, yet they carried the weight of decades of experience, loss, and survival. The crowd had grown silent, hanging on his every word. People were no longer laughing or curious in a casual way, they were listening, truly listening, to a man who had lived, loved, lost, and found solace in music. Some eyes were misty, some faces full of respect, and some heads bowed in quiet admiration. A young woman stepped forward, holding her phone. "I want to record this," she said softly. "Not for social media, just, for memory. So I can remember seeing you play." The veteran nodded gently, understanding the sentiment. People were starting to realize that talent and experience could not be measured by appearances or current circumstances. The reporter cleared her throat, finally speaking. "Sir, if it's all right, could we do a short interview? People would love to hear your story. Your talent deserves to be known." He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "All right. But only if it can help others understand something important. Music, it is bigger than fame. Bigger than wealth. It belongs to everyone, and it can survive even the hardest times." The reporter smiled and motioned for her cameraman. "Of course. That's exactly what people need to hear." As the interview began, the veteran recounted pieces of his life: his early love for the piano, the years of training, the thrill of performing, and the challenges that had led him to the streets. He spoke honestly about struggles with loneliness, with loss, and with society's judgments. And through it all, he emphasized how music had remained his lifeline, the one constant that never abandoned him. The crowd listened intently. Some were moved to tears, others nodded in silent agreement. Children leaned forward, fascinated by the story of someone who had once been like a hero in a faraway world, now standing among them, human and real. The veteran's humility and honesty added depth to the awe inspired by his skill. People realized that the man they had dismissed earlier was more than a musician. He was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the enduring power of art. Soon, news crews and reporters began to arrive, cameras and microphones in tow. Clips from the young man's social media post had gone viral, and people were curious to learn more about the homeless veteran who could play like a legend. Invitations to share his story came quickly, from local newspapers, radio stations, and even larger networks. Yet, despite the sudden attention, the veteran remained grounded. He continued to play, not for fame, not for recognition, but because it was who he was. Every note was a testament to survival, passion, and the undying love for the art that had shaped his life. As evening approached, the city lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the gathering. Street lamps reflected off the piano's polished surface, creating a scene that felt almost magical. The veteran played one final piece for the day, a soft, reflective melody that seemed to speak of endings and beginnings, of loss and hope, and of a life lived with courage. The crowd was quiet when the last note faded. People looked at one another, unsure how to react. There was no applause yet, only a profound sense of respect and awe. Finally, someone whispered, I think we just witnessed greatness." The veteran stood slowly, bowing his head slightly. He didn't need praise, he only needed to know that his music had touched hearts. And as people began to gather closer, offering words of gratitude, admiration, and curiosity, he realized something remarkable: he was no longer invisible. The world, even if only for a moment, had recognized his talent, his story, and his humanity. And in that recognition, he felt a warmth he hadn't experienced in years, a reminder that life, despite its hardships, still held moments of beauty, connection, and hope. The following morning, the veteran awoke to the sound of distant city traffic and the soft chirping of birds near the park bench where he had spent the night. The memory of yesterday's performance still lingered in his mind, like a vivid dream that refused to fade. People had come from all corners of the city, drawn not only by the music but by the story of the man who had poured his soul into every note. And now, after the world had witnessed a glimpse of his talent, the veteran faced a new day, one filled with both uncertainty and possibility. As he slowly stood and stretched, his hands brushed over the worn keys of his portable keyboard. The music that had been his refuge, his companion through loneliness and hardship, felt alive in his fingers once again. He remembered the faces in the crowd, the wide eyes, the gentle smiles, the look of awe that had replaced ridicule. For the first time in a long while, he felt seen, truly seen, not for his circumstances, but for who he was. Word of his performance had spread even further than he imagined. The young man who had first approached him with curiosity was now working to connect him with media outlets, music schools, and even local government programs for veterans. Messages and emails poured in, some offering performance opportunities, some expressing gratitude, and others simply sharing admiration. The veteran was overwhelmed. He had spent years in solitude, believing that the world had moved on without him, and now it seemed that the world had rediscovered him all at once. Despite the flurry of attention, the veteran remained grounded. He knew that the music itself was what mattered most, not the applause or recognition. He spent the morning practicing, letting his fingers move over the keys, reliving memories of past performances, and finding joy in creating new melodies. Each note reminded him that his talent was a part of him that could never be taken away, no matter what life had thrown his way. As he packed up his keyboard and prepared to leave the park, a small group of children approached him. Their eyes were wide with curiosity, and their voices were shy but eager. "Can you teach us how to play?" one little girl asked. "We want to learn like you." The veteran smiled warmly. He knelt down to their level, letting them see the kindness in his eyes. "Of course," he said. "Music is for everyone, and it doesn't matter where you come from or what your life looks like. You can start anytime, and every day is a chance to get better." For the next hour, he patiently guided the children, showing them simple notes, basic rhythms, and the importance of listening to the music as it grows. Their laughter and excitement filled the park, and for the first time in a long time, the veteran felt a sense of purpose that went beyond survival. He realized that sharing his gift, even in small ways, could inspire others and bring hope to those who might otherwise feel overlooked or forgotten. Later, a young journalist arrived, camera in hand, ready to conduct a proper interview. The veteran agreed, knowing that his story could reach far more people than the small crowd in the park. As they spoke, he recounted his life with honesty and humility, the early fame, the challenges that led him to the streets, and the unbroken bond he had with music. He emphasized that talent alone was not enough to navigate life. Resilience, patience, and a willingness to continue despite setbacks were equally important. The journalist was moved, tears forming in her eyes as she listened. "Your story, it's incredible," she said softly. "I don't think people realize how much courage it takes to keep going like you have. You've faced so much, and yet here you are, still sharing your gift with the world." The veteran nodded. "Courage isn't about being fearless," he said. "It's about moving forward even when you are afraid, even when life seems impossible. Music has always given me the strength to keep going, and I hope it can do the same for others." As the day progressed, invitations began arriving from local music venues, community centers, and schools. People wanted to host him for performances, workshops, and special events. A former student from one of his old music classes, now a professional pianist, reached out with tears in her voice, sharing how much she had missed his teaching and asking if he would consider returning to mentor young musicians. Despite the sudden surge of attention and opportunity, the veteran remained cautious. He had learned over the years that not everyone's intentions were pure, and he was wary of being exploited or taken advantage of. Yet, he also understood that this was a chance to rebuild, to reconnect with the world in a meaningful way, and to show that life could offer second chances, even after long periods of hardship. He accepted a few invitations carefully, prioritizing places where he could truly make a difference: schools, veteran organizations, and community events. Each performance was met with overwhelming appreciation, and he felt a sense of fulfillment that went beyond applause. People were not just watching a talented musician, they were witnessing a man who had survived, endured, and refused to let life's difficulties define him. One evening, after a particularly moving performance at a local community hall, the veteran walked outside and looked up at the night sky. The stars were bright, shining like distant reminders of possibility. He thought about the journey that had brought him here: the laughter, the judgment, the hunger, and the loneliness. He thought about the kindness of strangers, the curiosity of the young man in the park, and the countless people who had stopped to listen, to acknowledge, and to respect him. For the first time in many years, he felt a profound sense of hope. He realized that life, no matter how difficult or unpredictable, could still hold moments of beauty, recognition, and connection. He understood that his music was not only a reflection of his talent but also a bridge between the past and the present, between hardship and healing, and between strangers who had become witnesses to his story. The veteran also began using his growing platform to advocate for other homeless veterans. He spoke at events, sharing his experience and encouraging programs that provided support, training, and opportunities for those in need. He knew that his story was unique, but he also understood that many others were struggling in silence, unseen and unheard. Through music and advocacy, he could offer hope and inspire action, showing that resilience and determination could lead to positive change. Months passed, and the veteran's life slowly transformed. He found stable housing, reconnected with old friends and colleagues, and continued to perform in venues large and small. Yet, he never forgot the streets where he had played for coins, the laughter of those who underestimated him, and the lessons learned through adversity. Those experiences remained a source of humility, grounding him in the belief that success and recognition were not the ultimate goal. Service, connection, and the joy of creating art were. One afternoon, as he prepared for a concert in a local theater, the veteran paused to look at the piano that had accompanied him through every phase of his life. Its keys bore the marks of years of practice, struggle, and dedication. He placed his hands on them gently, feeling the familiar sensation of possibility and expression. The theater was filled with people from all walks of life: students, former colleagues, community members, and curious strangers who had followed his story. As he began to play, the room fell silent, captivated by the music that seemed to speak directly to their hearts. Every note was filled with emotion, history, and hope. The audience listened in awe, some with tears in their eyes, some with smiles of recognition and admiration. In that moment, the veteran realized that he had not only reclaimed his talent but had also transformed it into a source of inspiration for others. After the performance, people approached him with gratitude and admiration. They spoke of how his music had touched them, how his story had inspired them, and how his resilience reminded them of the power of perseverance. The veteran listened, humbly accepting the praise, but always redirecting attention to the importance of music, compassion, and support for those in need. As the night came to a close, the veteran stepped outside, breathing in the cool air. He reflected on the journey that had brought him here, from a homeless street musician laughed at by strangers to a celebrated pianist who had touched countless lives. The experiences of the past year had taught him that even in the darkest moments, hope could emerge, sometimes from the most unexpected places. And as he walked through the quiet streets, the veteran felt a profound sense of peace. Music had carried him through despair, connected him to others, and reminded him of the enduring power of art and human resilience. He knew that life would continue to present challenges, but he also understood that he possessed the strength, skill, and wisdom to face them. And most importantly, he realized that every note he played, every story he shared, had the potential to change lives, just as the kindness of strangers had changed his. The homeless veteran who had once been laughed at now stood as a living testament to the power of perseverance, talent, and the human spirit. He had faced ridicule, hardship, and invisibility, yet he had never abandoned his music or his hope. And in the hearts of those who had witnessed his journey, he became more than a legend, he became an inspiration, a reminder that greatness often hides in unexpected places, waiting for the world to recognize it. And with that thought, he sat at his piano once more, letting his fingers